A family that runs a major restaurant group. That was my husband's family. To my mother-in-law, who has a husband designated as the next head of the family, that status shined brighter than anything, and I, raised by a single father, seemed to be nothing but a stain on their family. To her, a daughter-in-law whose family and husband's status were beneath her own was a trivial existence that deserved to be ignored. However, the situation changed drastically when my design was chosen for the menu of the restaurant managed by my father-in-law. My mother-in-law had studied design a bit, but it seems she was eliminated in the first round of the selection process. "It's just a lousy thing I scribbled," she would say in sour grapes, but to hold such a thing against the work of a professional designer and to harbor resentment? After that, her behavior towards me, the one-parent-raised woman, shifted from ignoring me to outright mistreatment, and she would come to our separate house where my husband James and I lived to spout sarcasm and nag. "Ava, dear. The dust behind the TV hasn't been cleaned at all. What kind of upbringing leads to satisfaction with such cleaning?" My mother-in-law would start finding fault as soon as she arrived, loudly pointing things out. "That was actually me," my husband would reply, clearly disheartened. Since my husband was working from home and he was naturally helpful with housework, the chores had inadvertently become his burden. It was a complete boomerang back to my mother-in-law, questioning what kind of upbringing she gave. "Ava, dear. Are you pushing housework onto your husband again? What kind of wife does that? Neglecting chores because you prioritize work." I never slacked off at work or at home. She'd shift the blame onto something else. Even if my husband tried to stop her, my mother-in-law wouldn't quit until I apologized. "I'm really sorry. I'll try harder." Every time I said this and bowed, my mother-in-law would leave our place with a smug grin, satisfied. My husband always sighed at his mother's attitude. "I'm sorry, I'll take on more of the chores." No, it's clearly Mom's sarcasm. "I'm sorry for not being more supportive," he would say, always defending me, but his mother never took his words to heart. He had talked to his father about it, but the lack of any change in her behavior suggested that his father, busy with managing the business, probably forgot to follow up. Well, I just have to put up with my mother-in-law's ill-made sarcasm and so on. I thought as people aged, they would become more easygoing. But I never imagined she would pull something like this. My husband's cousin got engaged, and a celebration was set up. Apparently, they were inviting people from work, not just family, and they had rented out a hall in a fancy hotel that could accommodate 70 people for a grand celebration. The day after my husband informed me, I received a call from my mother-in-law. The celebration is a traditional event, so we'll leave some of the dishes to the venue, but family members will prepare the main dishes. We're assigning tasks for each type of dish. And I have a proposal, Ava, you used to brag about being good at cooking, right? Her tone was sarcastic, but I did remember saying once that I was good at cooking because I used to help my dad since I was little. If it turns out bad, you'll be the one embarrassed later, but that's fine. Please take care of the Japanese cuisine. Before I could respond, she had already made up her mind and ended the call. Well, that's typical, I thought, and began adjusting my work schedule for the day of the event and started selecting the Japanese cuisine menu. Everything went smoothly until the day of the celebration. In hindsight, it was just the calm before the storm. On the day of the engagement party, my mother-in-law called me on my cell phone. It was 11:30 a.m. The event was supposed to start at 1 p.m., so as the head coordinator, my mother-in-law should have been busy with the final venue check, right? Feeling puzzled, I answered. "Oh, Ava, dear. I checked the dishes you prepared, and such terrible cooking, please discard it." I was so shocked, I threw it all away. "What?" Caught off guard by her high-pitched chatter, I couldn't grasp the situation and gave a half-hearted reply. "I'm sorry, I'm at the office right now. I'm in the middle of work. I was rushing through an urgent job so I could make it to the celebration on time." "Humph, you're so shocked you can't even speak." "There's no time, it starts at 1. Hurry up and remake it." I was at a loss, we were not on the same page. Could it be that she didn't know I had swapped my duty for today? As I started to realize what might be happening, a dreadful thought came to mind. Calm down, me. What did my mother-in-law just say? She threw away the dishes. In fact, a few days after I was assigned to the Japanese cuisine, I had to swap tasks with someone in charge of sending out invitations due to unforeseen circumstances. I hadn't been concerned about contacting my mother-in-law, the event coordinator, because the lady, a person who swapped tasks with me, said she would call my mother-in-law. Listen carefully, mother-in-law. I'm at the office right now, have been all morning. I was removed from cooking duty, so I was catching up on work during the freed up time. I explained slowly. Then whose cooking is this? She mumbled, then I heard her gasp sharply. What are we going to do? There's only an hour left until the start. This is your responsibility. You didn't report the change. That's it. You'll take care of it. Otherwise, I'll say you threw it away. My mother-in-law was panicking so much, she was spouting nonsense. But I didn't want her going around saying I had tossed the food. Reluctantly, I apologized and excused myself from the office and rushed to the venue. I just missed the train and arrived a little past noon. I had explained the situation to my husband via text, so as soon as he saw me, he rushed over. He was looking pale. I'm too late. The food was in the green room, but there was an uproar because the Japanese cuisine was missing. When I went to the kitchen, the sink was clogged with food. It felt like a crime scene with a tense atmosphere. Ava threw it away. Her absence is proof enough. My mother-in-law had apparently accused me. I was holding back a headache. I need to get to the scene. I told my husband, and at the same time, I entrusted him with a request. As soon as I arrived in the kitchen, my sharp-eyed mother-in-law spotted me. Ava. What have you done? She yelled. My husband's aunts, his cousin, the one engaged, and the fiancée, Emily, along with other relatives who heard the commotion, were there. They all turned their accusing eyes on me, but I corrected them calmly. I did not throw away the food. Don't play dumb. Doing something like this, ruining a celebration. Someone ungrateful like you is a disgrace to our family. My mother-in-law immediately shrieked. I was working all morning. You called me, saying the food was thrown away, didn't you? What? This daughter-in-law always looks down on me, and now she's trying to pin such a terrible crime on me. She cried out, playing the victim to the surrounding crowd. To my disadvantage, the relatives seemed to trust my mother-in-law, who had been in the family for over 20 years, more than me, who had only been part of the family for a few. I felt their condemning eyes on me again. Should I call the office then, to prove I was working all morning? If I did that, her lie would eventually be exposed. I was determined to fight this out. There's no need for that. Ava was handling a task for me. It was last-minute work, but she graciously accepted it. The owner of the unexpected voice was my father-in-law. With my husband standing behind him, relief on his face. I was worried he'd be too busy to respond, but my husband had successfully reached out to him. The trust as the head of the main family was evident. The gazes on me shifted awkwardly, and suspicion began to gather on my mother-in-law. So, Ava. About that call earlier. Mother-in-law said she tasted the food and it was so bad she threw it all away. She told me over the phone to remake it. I recounted. The room buzzed with my testimony. And then a sobbing sound rose above it. It was Emily, the fiancée. I mostly cook Western food, but I worked hard on the Japanese dishes too, and they turned out delicious. She sobbed, clinging to her fiancé. Yes, she was the one who had swapped tasks with me. She was the main character of this event, but she wanted everyone to taste her cooking as a surprise plan, so I agreed to help her. She had said to keep it a secret, but I never expected Emily's dishes to be kept a secret even from my mother-in-law, the event coordinator. Emily's cooking is terrible. That means my taste is in question too since I hired her for our Italian restaurant, my father-in-law mused. No. That's not it. I didn't mean that, and my mother-in-law retorted in panic. But it was too late to deny it now. Emily is a chef at my father-in-law's Italian restaurant. Even though it was Japanese cuisine, it was made by a professional. Moreover, the person in question had the endorsement of my father-in-law. Your tongue must have soured from all the snide remarks to your daughter-in-law, my father-in-law sighed with sarcasm. With sarcasm laced in his sigh, my father-in-law looked on. My mother-in-law clung to him, apologizing profusely. Aren't you apologizing to the wrong person? It's terrible to throw away Emily's cooking, no matter how bad you thought it was. I couldn't hold back and said. My mother-in-law's face twisted in anger as she grabbed me by the collar. I thought it was your cooking, that a dish made by someone raised by a single parent would be tasteless and poor, so I kindly threw it away. If I had known it was someone else's, I would have never done that. It's all your fault. You must have set me for this. She ranted, spitting as she yelled. Amid her disgrace, my husband's aunt raised her voice with a frown. Knowing that I'm divorced, do you imply that being raised by a single parent is shameful? Our late grandmother also lost her mother when she was young. By your logic, it seems our family would be full of a shameful people. She said. Her gaze cold as if looking at a bug. No, that's not it. I didn't know, my mother-in-law protested. It doesn't matter. We've seen your true nature, my husband's aunt dismissed her. Shivering, my mother-in-law collapsed onto the cold floor of the kitchen. What a commotion, came a voice unexpectedly. I turned to see an old man in a wheelchair. It was my husband's grandfather, the current patriarch of the main family. I heard such a ruckus. I don't quite understand the situation, but throwing away food is unacceptable. He nodded gravely. The late grandmother used to share a story of receiving sweet potatoes from a field while evacuating. The sweetness momentarily took away the pain of losing her mother. He recalled, and silence enveloped the room. Food carries the emotions of the people who make it. Grandmother always said she was saved by the kindness of the cook. To waste food is to be less than human. We don't have such people in our family, do we? He directed the question at my father-in-law. Absolutely not. My father-in-law responded, and the patriarch left, content with the answer. The patriarch's words are law. At least to everyone's eyes, the divorce my father-in-law decided for my mother-in-law seemed like the proper course of action. My mother-in-law, who had once boasted about being the wife of the future head of the main family, knew all too well the strength of the patriarch's authority, understanding that no appeal would overturn his word. She had to go around apologizing to all the relatives, including those from the branch families, not only for the disruption at the celebration but also for the disrespect against food, which was particularly shameful for a family involved in the food business. She ended up kneeling and sobbing. Regarding the divorce settlement, after deducting a compensation for ruining the celebration, it was agreed to give her a modest sum for her future setup. Cast out of the main house, she ended up in a small apartment meant for singles. Shunned by all relatives and without anyone to turn to, she began a lonely life. She never would have imagined that her petty jealousy and mistreatment of her daughter-in-law, leading to throwing away the food, would result in such a downfall. My mother-in-law had committed an act that a person should never do. She received the consequences of her actions.